Good morning, television friends, I guess. Though I probably haven't met most of you and probably never will. Let's see. Today I was going to talk a little bit about secure email and IM. And some of the things I hear from people all the time and why I think that it's really important that people reconsider sending insecure messages. So, I guess I'll try and start off with butchering a Snowden quote. Edward Snowden, that is. He's a guy who he worked, I believe, he had access to top secret information, and as a SharePoint administrator, and then released a lot of that damning information, via, I believe, WikiLeaks, and it landed him, he had to travel around the world, and he's currently essentially in exile, I think still in Russia. And one of the things he said is, he said, just because you, he said, being against encryption because you have nothing to hide is like being against free speech because you have nothing to say.
Group text from Loretta Elizabeth.
And I think that really hits the nail on the head with regard to, people's general attitudes. Usually the people I know who are out there doing pretty amazing things, they at least understand some of the benefits of encryption in what they're doing, though amazingly many of them still don't use it. One group that I would think would use encryption all the time are attorneys, and attorneys that I know, they never use encryption. Anytime I propose communicating with them via encrypted means, they will not do it. And maybe I'll get a little bit into that in a minute, some of the reasons for that. If I don't get to it, just look up border crossings, and I better touch on it really quick just in case I forget. Essentially, one problem with encryption is if you encrypt like your laptop or whatever and you cross the border, there have been cases where border officials, border agents of the state will detain you indefinitely. Like, we're talking days, months, potentially years, for the sole crime of not typing in your password to decrypt the contents of your hard drive. So that's something that you should know about before you get into it. I would recommend, if you're going to travel across a border, making your machine inert for travel, and there may be some software that makes that easier for you. You could use images, and then maybe a system image, and then you would have like a dumb one that's got nothing but Thomas and Friends videos on it for when the folks go and ask you to open up your computer at the border, but then maybe ship the encrypted image to like your hotel or whatever, and then when you arrive you can have fun installing your laptop again. It depends on, a lot of this stuff, it depends on how much makes sense for you, but the whole point of this isn't to get you to encrypt everything to an NSA level of security. The whole point of it is to get you thinking about how you can introduce it in little bits here and there in your life, because you'll be better off with little bits as well. So anyway, the main focus is essentially instant messaging, which I'm going to use to incorporate various IM networks, and also SMS, which is like how people send text messages on cell phones. And then there's also email security, which email doesn't seem to be going away. The strange thing about email, and one of the things that most frustrates me about it, is that it morphs. The way it's used morphs all the time, and that's the very thing that's kept it alive. But it's also a sign that it's a jack of all trades and a master of none. Even though people can make email do wonderful things with good tools, it's it's not going to be a there are usually, if there's something that you want to do, there's a better tool for it. And so right now I mainly use email just as an interface with people who refuse to use anything better, which I try not to have interactions with that type of person. And it's usually not people, it's organizations are very stubborn. They set up a path for interacting with customers via email, and it's usually not businesses that have a choice, where I have a choice. It's usually government agencies, or people that are in industries that have a lot of regulatory compliance. It's very expensive for them to bring new means of communication online, so they stick with the ones they have. Examples would be medical and banking, which incidentally are two areas where encryption would be really beneficial. So anyway, let's talk a little bit about SMS. So my understanding of SMS from an encryption standpoint is that, first of all, it's transmitted in clear text, and it may be encrypted in transit over the air, but not necessarily. And also, once it is received and internal to the SMS vendors' networks, it may not be protected very well. So why do I believe that? Well, there have been a number of high-profile cases where people died, usually movie stars and stuff, and within minutes of the news, tabloid, private investigators, hackers, they've gone in and they've accessed SMS messages and pulled them all, and then reviewed them at their leisure, and then interesting revelations about the circumstances of the person's death have come about. Now, this is another thing you see all the time, is SMS messages come out in a legal process known as discovery. So I personally was involved in a court case against public officials, and during that court case, everyone was communicating via a lot of their communications were email, and those were done in a very professional manner, and very they had a process of destroying the emails after a certain amount of time. So you don't need encryption on something that's totally destroyed, but if you're using someone else's email server like Gmail or Hotmail or Outlook.com or Yahoo Mail or any of these vendors or third-party vendors, or even just an ISP or like AT&T, all of these companies, they could give you an email address, and when you delete things, they could show it as deleted. But it's a common practice for software engineers like myself, because people are so angry when you actually delete things, to never delete things that don't take much space. So an example of that would be clear text, plain text things. So it's likely that even if you delete, it's likely, since text messages are so small, it's likely that they're kept forever. Maybe that's against the policy of your vendor or whatever, but just imagine that any SMS message you've ever sent to anyone is still out there alive and kicking, and I'm guessing that you've said something that you regret, and that's out there. And this is something that we need to teach our kids as they're coming of age in a cell phone era. You don't want to have unencrypted conversations, and people have been more inclined to use apps like Snapchat and WhatsApp and things that offer additional security features. And so we'll have to see how accessible those things are to courts. I know that a lot of these companies are not allowed to operate in nations that if they don't give that security apparatus of that nation a back door. And so these would be systems that I'd reconsider using. And But there are some exceptions to that as well. And so it's more, rather than an absolute black and white thing, it's shades of gray. You want to use different technologies for different purposes, and you want to generally bump up against the highest security that is feasible given your situation. So anyway, yeah, these SMSs, they're essentially postcards. I mean, all that has to happen is there needs to be a warrant from a warrant from a judge. They just find out who the cell phone carrier is, which if they didn't know, then they can just go and request some phone bills and find out who the carrier was or who the carrier is. They can sometimes just demand that the person tell who their carrier was, and then they can go get a search warrant and they can get all the SMS messages. There doesn't seem to be much of a limit. And if you pay attention to the news, you're going to see lots and lots of SMS messages. They're a prime, anytime there's a big high-profile case, SMS messages are a key part of that, because they're typically out of the control of the sender. Even if they delete them, they're on backups and stuff like that. And so they're really attainable for the justice system. One thing that's weird is I recently worked for a company that was, shut down by regulators, and I believe that the mechanism of that shutdown, or the actual reason for the shutdown, was ridiculous and trumped up, but nonetheless, they were providing competition effectively to an establishment that is very well entrenched and politically active. And so I've seen, there are a couple of organizations that I've been with that have been shut down for that kind of reason. They were too effective at being an alternative to the establishment. And in that case, I noticed right before I was leaving, because I decided to leave really before this regulatory action happened, and I left for other reasons than the than the type of stuff. It was mostly just a personal decision. I just didn't feel like my talents were, I didn't feel like my talents were being put to use and stuff like that. So anyway, I noticed a lot of the key leadership was, they were communicating almost exclusively not via the official email system, but via SMS messages, and also a little bit via like Google Hangouts and stuff like that. That has more encryption behind it. So, but mostly just unencrypted text messages. And so that to me was really, that seemed really weird, because the whole reason they were doing it is to get things off the record. And in my personal experience with the court cases that I was with, SMS was a terrible way to do that. So what I'd recommend, so a way to think about SMS is it's like a postcard. So on a postcard, you get a piece of paper and you stick a stamp on it, and you write the address on where it's headed, and then on the other side, you just write whatever you're going to say, and anyone who handles it can just read that postcard. So any postal worker at any postal facility, or if it gets delivered to the wrong neighbor's mailbox or whatever, it can always be read by anyone. Now, you could do this by writing your postcards in code, but it wouldn't make for as nice of a holiday display. So, if you display your Christmas cards or whatever. But yeah, that's a good way to look at emails as well. Emails are generally just sent clear text, and a lot of people are fooled because nowadays they use webmail like Google or Microsoft Outlook or Yahoo Mail, and they all, in the browser they have a little padlock showing that that's secure, but that's really only secure to the point where it travels to the company. If you send a Gmail email to a Gmail customer, then it will be secure within Gmail's network, but Gmail Google employees may be able to read it, and in fact, they often scan your emails with AI and bots to sell relevant advertising to you. So, that's kind of their business model, is being able to read your email. And so what you want to do is you're going to want to encrypt it before you hand it over to them, because even if it is Google to Google and it's encrypted, and even if Google restricts so only certain key users like moderators and of course their bots have access to this information to read your email, if you encrypt an email, that isn't going to happen. In fact, I used to use a technology more often called S-MIME, and S-MIME still works and is still valid today, but S-MIME is an encryption technology that relies on implementation within the email client, they call it, the app that lets you read email. So a really good example would be Outlook as part of Office on the desktop. Outlook you might use in a work environment, or the Microsoft Mail app, though it only seems to be supporting S-MIME encryption for enterprise, like for Office 365 customers right now. But the older versions of it, Outlook Express, and then the competitor to that, Mozilla Thunderbird. Wow. Mozilla Thunderbird supports S-MIME, and Mac Mail supports S-MIME. So as long as you're using those mail programs, you can encrypt your mail. But if you go and log in on your cell phone, a lot of the cell phone clients don't support S-MIME anymore. They used to, but it's a feature that's been dropped, which kind of makes you wonder, why are these vendors dropping security as a feature? People would be outraged if they dropped encrypted browsing on mobile devices. But it hasn't happened with email. And then if you go and you try and look at it on a device that doesn't support encryption, then the most you're going to get is gibberish, and people just don't want to deal with that. If they get an important email, which typically encrypted emails, hopefully people would encrypt important emails, then you're going to need to unencrypt it, and if you can't do that, you're just out of luck. So it's I think the switch to webmail that doesn't support encryption has diminished the ability of people to encrypt. So what ways how can you respond to that? Well, one way is to use a webmail client that does support encryption. There are two that are very popular, and there are probably some more. One is Proton Mail, and the other is Tutanota. And I think Proton Mail is out of Switzerland, and Tutanota, I forget where they're out of, but it's a similar deal. And the advantage to both of these, so it's, in order for something to be encrypted, you can think of it kind of like a box. And let's say I'm going to send an encrypted email to you. So I get a box, and on one side it's got a lock, and on the other side it's got a hinge, except instead of a hinge it's got another lock. And so I have the key to one lock, and you have the key to the other lock. But in order to send this message to you effectively, I can't just put any old lock on there. I need to know how your lock is keyed, and then put a lock, or know what keys you have, and then I need to send it with a lock that I know you can open. And so there are things called key servers that give a mathematical, they call it a public key, and that can be used to lock up the box. And then you would have a private key that is kind of like a skeleton key that opens up all of your all of the boxes locked to you. And so that way I can lock up the message, and I can unlock it and open it anytime I want, and then I can send it to you, and you can unlock it and open it anytime you want, and thus encryption is achieved. No one in between can unlock it without doing a whole bunch of work to break into the very, very strong mathematically encrypted box. I can go into more details on some of these things, but I'm getting close to work, and so one of the things I'd encourage you to do is, so consider using instead of SMS and instead of plain text email, use an encrypted messaging service. Signal's a really good one, from what I've seen, and a lot of the others, there are concerns I have about them. most notably with nation states digging, forcing them to turn over a back door or something like that to them, or else not let them operate in their borders. But another one, and the thing is with Signal, it's not really on the Microsoft platform, which I use a lot. So I use Skype, and Skype has been found, according to Edward Snowden, who I mentioned at the beginning of this, there are rumors that it's been compromised, and there have also been some court cases where informants were participating, but I believe that they have some way of policing the messages sent back and forth across their network. I think I've seen some stuff about fighting terrorism and child porn and stuff like that, which in order to recognize that content, they could be doing it through pattern matching of known offenders and stuff like that, and then they wouldn't need to decrypt to get an idea of what content to block, but they also may have a backdoor. Now, that is probably, they just announced a partnership with Signal by Open Whisper Systems, so hopefully Skype's security is going to be coming up to the level of other Signal users and other platforms that use Signal as their encryption methodology. So that's something to watch out for. Anyway, the email thing, I was talking about the keys, and I'm sorry I changed the subject so abruptly, because it's really important to talk about the keys. So if I try and send you an email, I got to have your key, but that kind of requires you to even be set up with the system. And so I'll tell you a brief story about how I dealt with that. I was dealing with a vendor that is very security conscious, and I had a chat with them, and a customer service related chat, and I was trying to regain access to a lost account. So this is immediately going to trigger a bunch of red flags in any good secure company. They're going to try and stop people who shouldn't. One of the ways to steal someone's account is to pretend that you lost access to it and then work through their process to get it by providing lots of personal information and stuff like that. Well, so they're already kind of suspicious just because of what I'm trying to do. But anyway, at some point they said, well, we need you to send in some identification. And I've seen this on lots of sites nowadays, and lots of apps. In order to unlock the full capability, they want you to send a picture of your photo ID. I've seen this with Bitcoin trading organizations and all kinds of stuff like that. So anyway, I'm chatting with them, and they're like, oh, and I said, well, I'd like, instead of, they said they were going to send me a form to fill out, and I said, okay, that's fine, but any communication we have via email, I would like you to do it encrypted. And they said, well, we don't need to do it encrypted because this is just a blank form and you can download it from our website, and so there's no need for encryption there. And I would generally prefer it to be encrypted because I don't want any third parties knowing the nature of my communication. So just the fact that I requested this form tells snoopers information about stuff, and also knowing that I've lost control of this thing I was trying to get access to. If someone were snooping, they could see that, submit the form themselves, and they could start like a little race and make it even more difficult for, so it could kind of tip them off. So their logic was not sound, because essentially you should, if possible, you should encrypt everything from the start, and also you should encrypt lots of stupid, worthless stuff as well. If you just email someone and say, hey, how was your day, you should encrypt that, because it takes as long to crack and open as a whole bunch of personally identifiable information and medical records and banking info and all this kind of stuff as well. Also, you shouldn't really tip off anyone to the contents with the subject. I might consider, I don't really have a good process on this myself, but maybe just for encrypted messages, give it a unique identifier or something, like the date, like just call it message and then the date and time or whatever, just so that you can go and specifically find it later, or maybe use some kind of, I don't know, inside key phrase or something like that, a passcode or something that, not a passcode, but like a code name or something that kind of narrows it down to the general type of thing, But yeah, you want to be careful about how much information you divulge. Anyway, so I was interacting with these people. They've already indicated that while they're concerned about security, they're not particularly set up to be secure, nor do they have a security mindset, because they're telling me, oh, it doesn't matter if we send this document to you unencrypted. So they sent the document to me unencrypted, and I read it, and it says, just reply to this email with a scan of your government-issued photo ID and a utility stub. Like, these are... They were asking people to send this information across the internet unencrypted. And yeah, probably no one's going to see it right now, but if anyone is ever compromised and gets access to those emails, which happens all the time, and it could be anyone along the route, but keep in mind, this is not from a Gmail user to a Gmail user. This is from, a private email server user to where I control the security to a certain extent. Though I have to trust the ISP, and based on our contract, they say they're going to be secure, but companies don't always do that. And then that traverses across the open internet with a bunch of companies that I don't know what their security policies are, and then who knows what their internal security is. I've already established that they don't think it's a big deal to have unimportant emails unencrypted. So anyway, how do you deal with a situation like that? Well, I went back into the chat and I said, hey, look, I realized that you said that this document doesn't need to, the blank document doesn't need to be encrypted, but now you want me to send my personally identifiable information via unencrypted email. And I kid you not, their response was, well, our email is secure. In other words, because someone working in a call center has a, email address that their IT department tells them is secure internally, they just assume that the whole chain is encrypted. And that's like kind of a running trend here, is that people see the padlock, it's really only padlocked for the first step, and then the rest of the trail is just open wilderness, and who knows who can access that information. So the way I dealt with it is I had an account at a web-based encrypted email provider, and both of the ones I mentioned, they allow you to encrypt an email to someone when you don't know the key, and then you can give them the key via some other mechanism. So what I did is I said, well, look, I can't send this to you unencrypted. And they complained in the chat and stuff like this. I said, here's what we're going to do instead. I'm going to send it, what's your agent name? I said, how can I address this email in the subject line so that it will get to you specifically? And the agent told me, like, just say attention such and such. And so I said, okay, so this is attention such and such in the title. And then in the encrypted, supposedly encrypted IM window through the browser, I sent them a passcode which I asked them for a passcode, and don't ever ask for a passcode from someone like that, because their passcode is going to be like password 1, and it's like, no, seriously. Like, I mean, that's if you're going out of your way to make an encryption, a conversation encrypted, and you work for a company, and a customer says they're not going to deal with you anymore unless you communicate encrypted, and then they're like, they ask you for a password and you give them freaking password 1, I mean, you might as well just start screaming obscenities and flicking them off, because that's the biggest FU that you could possibly do. So anyway, yeah, they did that, but they were clearly idiots. I mean, they didn't know what they were doing, and with regard to security at all. So anyway, I suggested a better password that I figured they could write down at least, and I sent it to them, and then I sent them a test message, and I asked them, that didn't include a payload. I just wanted to make sure they could open it. There's no sense in putting an encrypted payload in something they can't open. So then they were able to open it up and reply to me, oh yes, I got it. Now you can actually send your real documents. And so I sent that, and they were able to use the same passcode. And the thing is, it was kind of throwaway, but they were able to do it. And that's kind of the moral of the story here, is that no one is going to, most people aren't going to watch a video about email security. They don't care. They're told that they're secure by user interfaces and by lying companies who want to use their personal information to sell advertising. They're told this by incompetent IT departments who, if you watch the news, even the biggest companies are getting hacked all the time with the most sensitive data of their customers going out into the wild. It's all lies. And so don't listen to liars about security. I mean, you wouldn't bank with a bunch of felons, at Felons Bank, oh, it's okay, your money's safe with us, honest. I mean, who would trust them? So it's possible for felons to be reformed, but I don't imagine Felons Bank would do really well. Especially if it was run all by bank robbers. But our current banks are essentially run by bank robbers, so I don't know. Who's the thinker now? So yeah, anyway, you want to, if you're having a conversation, like I just went and to remind myself, I have in my unencrypted email the signature line, because sometimes conversations get initiated this way, or it's got to be a real quick reply from an unencrypted system, and the footer is like, hey, even though we started this conversation unencrypted, let me get you a passcode so that you can unlock my encrypted emails in the future. And it's a reminder for me to not really have any unencrypted conversations other than that first one. And even when people contact me via, like, if someone SMSs me, I just say, hey, here's my link. Here's a link. You can reach me on Skype. People say, and so, like I said, Skype may be possible to be compromised by governments, but there have also been a lot of cases where governments have gone and sued Skype because they couldn't crack into it. It has some security. It's better than SMS. And the advantage to Skype, and it's going to get better with the Signal partnership, but, the advantage to Skype is that it lets you do other things like send video messages and do conference calls and kind of move things out of text, which is easier to monitor in a lot of ways because it's so small in file size. So if you have something like video, they would have to go and pull down the video file, which is pretty large. They would have to rip out the audio stream. They'd have to run it through speech analysis systems and pick out keywords and stuff, and then have an analyst go and look at where they think things happen. They might miss some stuff. And also, if they're going to dedicate resources to trying to, if you have a lot of video conversations, especially the Skype encryption, the Skype video calls are encrypted to an extent, then it just adds a bunch of roadblock and hassle. So someone who really wants to do it at a nation state level is probably going to do it, but it's probably out of the scope of your HR department or a court doing discovery or all this kind of stuff, unless you've done some really bad stuff. So well, hopefully I'll get some feedback on this, on things that people think I didn't convey very clearly. I kind of was putting off doing it because I wanted to give some thought to it, but then I also thought that there's some very useful information and anecdotes and stuff that that I think would help people start thinking about it. And so maybe later on I'll do a more in-depth about some of the specifics and maybe keep you updated with regard to Skype as its Signal integration moves forward. But yeah, in the meantime, I would just encourage you to, at the very start, just stop using SMS, and then also stop sending unencrypted email, and remind yourself by doing that, to do that by putting in your signature file, so that as you're writing an email, you get to the bottom and it's like, hey, I really prefer not to send encrypted email, and that'll jog you, and it's like, you know what, I have the power to move this over to an encrypted medium. And then it's really up to the other person about whether or not they want to continue the conversation. And the tools today, like Tutanota and Proton Mail, it's really as easy as, you know, you can download an app. It's as easy as Gmail and Hotmail. It's just encrypted. And my hope is that with more and more people going over to Proton Mail and to Tenoda, first of all, that's going to fund them for further security developments, and then also it's going to provide market pressure on Google and Outlook and Yahoo, who was subject of a giant hack themselves, to include encryption natively within their browser-based clients. So those are some things you can do to get started, and that's it. I'm gonna go in and get working for the day. So be sure to like and subscribe, and most importantly, if you know someone, I mean, this was kind of a bit of a technical overview intended for a more technical and more freedom-loving audience that already is probably inclined to encryption. They've probably wanted to get into it, but they just weren't sure how, or some of the reasons why, or how critical it was to do so. Yeah, if there's someone that you think this video would be right for, please share it with them, send them a link, and like I said, I'd really love feedback. I've been encrypting my emails. At one point I had, you know, this is before webmail was big, I actually had my entire family with SMIME encrypted email, and it was neat because I used to post to Usenet groups, which were like what we used before Facebook, and it was kind of like email, but it was on these shared mailboxes called Usenet groups. And I remember one time I posted a question, and I always put my public key out there, my SMIME public key out there, and a lot of people complained bitterly. They're like, "Oh, what's this here? You trying to hack me?" I mean, it's just ridiculous. People were so afraid of security because they didn't understand it. And so anyway, I'd have this key there, and then people tried to tell me that by putting my public key out there, hackers would reverse engineer it and find out my private key, which is very difficult mathematically. So yeah, go ahead, start, you go and start hacking people's public keys to get their private key, and show the CIA what you've done. They'll hire you in a heartbeat, or the NSA. That's exactly what they would love. So but yeah, I'd go and I sent out this tech support request, and I digitally signed it. And the other advantage of digital signatures is it shows that the messages have not been tampered with. So the big thing back there with webmail was you'd send an email, and then they'd add on an advertisement in your email, like in plain text, as and say advertisement, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, so they would actually change. Imagine if the mailman, wow, I'm surprised I haven't thought of this. Imagine if the mailman went and just stamped advertisements for local merchants on all of your postcards, just because they knew, well, someone's going to read this side, so we can take this opportunity to advertise. It's really a shitty thing to do. So anyway, I sent a tech support request. I digitally signed it, and someone in the Department of Defense, some IT person there, maybe someone like Snowden, they responded, but because they had my public key, they responded encrypted. So I just thought it was really cool. Like, here I am getting encrypted communications from the Department of Defense. One other quick thing that maybe I'll talk about later is there's actually a list of patient rights when you go to a doctor's office, and next time you go to your doctor or whatever, you can go and ask to see that list, and it's their federal patient rights. And one of them that I think is really interesting, and I don't think anyone in Congress has thought about the ramifications of this, but it says that you have a right to private communication, and as long as it's reasonable, that you can insist that all communication from your physician happen via that method. And so what I've seen is a lot of physicians, they use a third-party interaction app to like a medical website that you log into, and the medical website has a little padlock on it, and then they'll send you secure messages. But a lot of times I'd just rather send an email. It might be easier to send an attachment, or like, hey, look at my finger, is it supposed to be swollen like this? Something like that. And you can do all that through their portal, but they call them patient portals. But then you have to, in my experience, even though different doctors use the same company, they all have different accounts for their patient portal, so it's really freaking ridiculous. You have like the same website and like 12 different usernames and passwords, and they all have extremely guessable usernames, and so that gets you part of the way there to running a password cracker. I don't imagine, I know security is their business, but I don't imagine that these patient portals are all that secure. So but anyway, they say right there that you are guaranteed, that if you request alternate means of communication, as long as it's doable, then they have to do it under federal law. And so I was looking into that, and I actually asked a organization. They wouldn't give me a patient portal login, and they also wouldn't allow me to. I asked them to communicate via secure email, and this is something common. All companies should have the capability for secure email. And this is like, a doctor's office of the size of the one I was dealing with. It was huge. They had like multiple offices in different cities and all this. They should have the capability to send encrypted email and know how to work with certificates. And eventually their IT guy contacted me, and he's just like, yeah, I got your request. And he's like, yeah, we're not going to communicate via encrypted email. We're just not going to do that. It's like, well, I'm looking at federal law here. I don't really see where it says you have a choice. So anyway, that's another story, an ongoing story. But yeah, I mean, banks, lawyers, doctors, it's probably going to be hard for you to get them to using the encryption that you would think would be obvious, encrypted email. But and they'll tell you, oh yeah, we don't send emails because they're insecure, and you're like, oh, no problem, I can secure them. Or they'll say, we don't send emails because they're insecure, and then they'll like deny that they are securable through encryption. And they're very stubborn, and that's for regulatory reasons. But I think if enough people demand it and point out what a ridiculous position it is, then they'll have to change. And also, if people go to doctors that are fine with it. Actually, the place I got my eyewear prescription, when I got that document, that's the first time I really noticed the little clause, and I just said, oh, I noticed this clause here. I would like to communicate via encrypted email. And they actually went and got S-MIME set up. Their receptionist did it. Their receptionist set up S-MIME, and then whenever I send an encrypted email to them, they just read it and respond to it like any other email. No biggie. So it's doable. You just got to ask, and you got to be persistent sometimes, but always polite in how you do it. All right, I really got to get to work, but I hope this was interesting, and I really could use your feedback on it. Talk to you all tomorrow. Bye.